The worst Wuthering wave tier list. Yo, Andler.
Erdwin just made the
Okay, yo, Andler, how about this? Yo, Andler, how about this? If you watch this, if you are watching my stream right now, yo, quit Wuthering waves. Just make guides for Star Savior. Yeah, how about that? If you make a tier list for Star Savior is a very welcoming and wholesome community because of Mr. Nice, right? You don't need all that, right? And there it is. The worst Wuthering tier wave, we'll watch it in just a little bit as a Wuthering wave tourist. Wuthering waves tier list got ruined by Private, right? What's the situation?
The worst tier list for Wuthering waves I've seen in the website's history. Those changes include putting Karthethia right next to Carlotta in the same tier. And that comes off the back of them changing the way that the tier list works from previously being more DPS oriented into a metric they label as value. I actually personally make value-based tier lists, so why do I consider this a bad thing? There's three major metrics they've listed that I disagree with heavily in terms of their value assessment. One of the biggest examples of this, Karthethia is in T1. Now, I actually somewhat agree with the placement of Karthethia being in T1, but when you look at the context of the characters that they put next to her and their own evaluation of how they label the tier list, it makes no sense. One of the biggest considerations for them in this tier list is the cost of a character, and Karthethia is a character who pairs with Arrow Rover, for example. Karthethia pairing with Arrow Rover in that regard drags down the total cost of her team, one of the metrics used for their calculation. Now, let's look at who's right next to her. Carlotta. Carlotta is a character who, for reference, does less damage than literally every single character in here, does less damage than every character in the tier below her, but somehow ends up right next to Karthethia, despite the fact that
Bro, I literally just realized Jiyan is the same tier as Zani. A 1 point... Bro, this is the equivalent of saying Scylla deals more damage, or rather Scylla deals the same amount of damage as Firefly, or like as Akron. Because Zani was Anniversary 2.0, right? Yeah, so Scylla deals the same damage as Akron, which for version 4 in HSR, you know, will that happen? I'm not sure, right? But we'll see. We'll see.
She needs more cost. In order to play Carlotta, you need high-cost teams. You're going to need either a Rhinne plus a Shorekeeper, you're going to need a Contarella, or you're going to need Jeje. So, not only did you just drag up the cost of a team, you dragged up the cost of a team to do less damage than what Karthethia just did. So you're spending more for your resources, you're getting less out of it, you do less damage as a whole, and you have a lower ceiling. As someone who doesn't understand the game, which is who these tier lists are mainly aimed at, you're going to think that Carlotta and Karthethia are near each other in terms of which one you should pull. But that is so far from reality. Carlotta is either pairing with complete garbage units down over here, or she's dragging down the performance of one of, if not the literal best character in the game, Rhinne. On top of that, you're doing way less damage for way more cost. There's so many examples of this throughout the tier list as well. Another character we have rated up here, Jinchi. Jinchi is a character who needs to pair with other 5-star limited units once again. With one of the most important metrics for their tier list being whether or not a character has value, how is Jinchi, who's doing
how the fuck is Encore the same tier as Jinchi, bro? Isn't she, bro? Encore is like the Kelala, right? She's like Kelala of the standard DPS. How did that even happen? How did bro fall off this hard? That is crazy.
Whether or not a character has value?
Yes,
how is Jinchi, who's doing comparable damage to Camellia, who uses more expensive teams than Camellia, because Camellia can pair with Sanhua, going an entire tier above Camellia into T2. But when you start breaking down other characters and what
Camellia
that value
is tier 3? Holy shit. Wait, what happened, bro? Camellia is tier 3. Bro has a lower rating than the free DPS.
Higher tier above.
Oh, she's a Firefly of this game. Okay, I see.
But when you start breaking down other characters and what that value actually represents, it starts looking super weird too. Let's look at Jiyan. Jiyan is a character who comes up here because they're saying if you're playing non-quickswap Zani, it's a relatively similar performance, assuming Jiyan's best team. Well, let's look at the context of that. Zani is only going for herself, her signature weapon, and Phoebe. Phoebe doesn't need the signature weapon, so that's a 3-cost team. You're pairing that with the Spectre Rover once again, right? Even if you're not quick swapping, that's still a 3-cost team that performs around similar to what Jiyan would. Obviously, if you're quick swapping, they have the expert tag, should technically be higher, but we'll let that slide. Jiyan over here is not performing anywhere near that in similar costs. Think about his team with Jiyan plus Signature, Mortefi, and Shorekeeper. That's another 3-cost team. So with cost being one of the most important metrics for their tier list, that Jiyan team is performing nowhere near that level. Actually, it's going to be all the way down here below Camellia. So why do we have Jiyan at 1.5? Oh, it's because when you drag the cost higher, he can start performing a little bit better, on par with the team that we just mentioned with Zani. Oh, it's important to remember that that's not factoring in the cost, so I'm not understanding what's going on here. On top of that, Jiyan is now dragging down the value of both Chikona and Yuno over here. Chikona has better teams with Karthethia, has a better team with Yuno, has a better team with Sigurka, and then Yuno has better teams with herself, Chikona, Lene. Yuno has better teams with Augusta, Yuno, and Lene or Shorekeeper, depending on what you want to run. Yuno can technically run with Sigurka if you want to play Sigurka, Choyuin, Yuno. There are a ton of options there. Both of these characters, which are the characters that drag up GN's performance, are performing much better without him. So he's actually dragging down the value of other characters on your account. How can this guy be T1.5 when he himself is not performing at those lower costs, which is the metric that we're using in this, right? But then simultaneously, he's also dragging down the viability of the other characters that he's pairing with who actually have T0 performances. He's dragging down the value of those characters. In what world is this a T1.5 unit? And I'm looking through this and I'm seeing so many inconsistencies labeled literally everywhere inside of the chart. Let's say Consorella, for example. Her direct opponent is Jeja. Think about what Jeja compared with. She compared with Jinshi, she compared with Carlotta, and that's it. Neither of those teams are particularly good anymore. Just to give some context, her best performing teams, which are Carlotta and Jinshi, are about the same performance as Luke free to play.
Holy shit, Luke is the same tier as AMF. That is crazy. The man is the same tier as AMF. The main push DPS, Cyrene, Amphoria's one. This guy is the same tier as AMF. Wow.
And for reference, those Luke free-to-play teams are 50% worse than the highest performing teams in the game currently. We already have Jeja over here in G2. That's fine. But then Consorella, who can Consorella pair with? Furlova. Those Furlova teams are actually performing pretty well. They're performing much better than the Carlotta and Jinshi teams. And then on top of that, she can also go with both Carlotta and Jinshi. So how can these two be even in the same tier? You can even take Consorella and Furlova and put them in the same team as Sigurka. It's not amazing, especially since Sigurka has near best in the game performance currently, but it's still an option and it outperforms every Jesha team. Consorella actually has more options than Jesha. She outperforms her. How are these two in the same tier?
And I remember back in my days, where we were putting for Consorella, back in my days, Chad was like, oh my god, I'm breaking my account because Consorella was not that good. Luckily, we have an E3 Consorella W, but look at it. Now she is on the rise again.
What world are we going to pretend that Songhua belongs on an account more than Consorella? That leads into the third problem I have with this tier list. When we look at the tier list, especially as someone who doesn't understand the game, especially as someone who is uninformed, we're going to see things like Verena over here, right next to Shorekeeper and Mornier, and we're going to think...
Okay, I think he makes a very good point, which is, if you make a tier list, right, it shouldn't really be with the objective of, like, the elitists, right? The Eagle 4-piece. Right, the zero cyclers. Most, if not all tier lists that if you want to cater for a gacha game, it should be catered towards casual audience, because casual audience know that they don't want to read audit. Right? They don't want to know like rotations and team comps. They just want a very quick chart to just display everything at face value. Because if you are an elitist, right? If you are a zero cycler, you want to like clear hologram like state, you already know that tier lists are purely just subjective at face value, because there are a lot of ways to bring up what your unit can do if you can do them for yourself, right? So yes, tier list should be made with the objective of like as casual friendly as possible, like super ultra casual. Like if I'm gonna look at a single tier in first class, I should know immediately, okay, this unit is that pretty good, all right? I just want to play the game. That's tier 0. I'm gonna pull a tier 0 character, right? So if I look at it right now, and if I see like, okay, if all 3 are tier 0 to me as a casual in Wild Waves, and I have no idea how the game works, it would just signal to me that they are the same caliber of strength. Which I'm guessing is not true, because Shorekeeper and Mornier is probably going to be having a higher value than Verena. Alright, so and I want to do...
Being a Verena on our account means that we have Shorekeeper or Mornier on our account. That is just simply not the case. Now, obviously, Verena is put up here because she's a decent character and she lowers the cost of teams. She's essentially free because you can get her from a selector, or you can lose all your 50-50s like I did. Think about the context of a new person who doesn't understand meta looking at this tier list. They see Verena up here, they think it's right next to Shorekeeper Mornier, and you've essentially just misled them because of the placement of the character. Why are we considering that specific character's cost in terms of the value?
Do you guys remember how this whole free thing came about? It was me, chat. It was me. It's the exact emote that you are using right now, right? There was this whole situation back in my days, right? Back in my days, there was this thing in Honkai Star Rail where they had a collaboration with Archer and Fate with Saber, right? So there's this 200 pulls incentive where if you pull 200 times in 3.4, which is Final's banner, if you pull 200 times, you get his Lycone, signature Lycone, for free. And ever since that free debacle, as long as you could get it with a free method, it was at 0 cost. right? It was 0 cost, and therefore it is a free unit. Just like how Archer is a free unit, therefore Archer is a 0 cost unit. Just like how S5 runway, you do not need a pool for S5 runway, therefore it is a free.
Rhinne is a free character, it doesn't mean we should be pairing it right next to Shorekeeper. It is completely nonsensical. But I look at this tier list as a new player, as a casual player, and I see Songhua over here, and I think, wow, Songhua is really better on account than Consorella is or Jesha is? She's not. We unironically have Donjin right next to Consorella,
it's a free unit.
Like they shouldn't be down
Literally.
We unironically have Chun-Li below Donjin.
Also, I just realized something. Wait, he's an actual fucking psychopath, guys. He has his Windows bar at the top corner of his PC instead of the bottom. Who the fuck does that, bro? I've never seen anyone do this in my entire life. Like, who actually does it? Who does that, guys? Who?
Levels of cooked that we're talking about right now. This is a completely nonsensical tier list. I think we all need to understand this. When looking at this tier list, are we really thinking that all these characters right next to each other are really equal in terms of value?
Is it a top browser? I don't think it is, man.
At home, thinking that you could tell a new player to pull for a Cartethia.
How do you even make your thingy go up? I have no idea.
In the same tier as Carlotta. Are any of you guys watching this at home thinking that Mortefi should be right next to Yuno and Chikona in terms of value? Are we being serious about this right now? If you're looking at a tier list and you saw a tier list and you said Mortefi is over here, not because he's actually good, but because he's a 4-star unit, does that not just seem misleading to you? Why am I even considering that when looking at the tier list? Yes, that can mean something for the other characters in terms of lowering their cost, but how does that mean anything for Mortefi specifically? That doesn't up Mortefi's performance. That doesn't make him actually good for an account. To make my point as clear as possible, I want the important takeaway to be this. Put yourself in the shoes of a new player or someone who's unaware of the meta. Look at this tier list. With the knowledge that you have now, with everything that I just told you, does this tier list make sense to you? Do you feel like you're giving an accurate image of what the game is like or what characters that you should be aiming for on an account when you look at this tier list? Then I want you to think about the metrics that they talk about in terms of cost, for example, and think, does this list really live up to that? Is Carlotta really a character worth thinking about in the year 2026 as a T1 unit when we're thinking cost, when she needs a 5-star sub DPS?
Send this clip to Braxaphone. Or did Braxaphone shit on Carlotta? I know Braxaphone was like the Carlotta guy. I don't know what bro is doing now, but
when she needs a Shorekeeper? When her teams are performing near 50% worse than the strongest teams in the game now? No. I think Perdwin's lost the sauce here. I think they'll update it. I think it'll become fine over time. But I think even with their stated metrics, once we understand it,
all right, bro, is real wide now.
This is just
holy shit, that is a crazy fucking thumbnail. Bro, I thought she was getting like mind fucked. Like, you know, there's this comic, there's this manga called Metamorphosis. You know what? Okay, you know what? Don't even worry about the WW Wuthering Waves tier list. Before we end off this video, hold up. I just want to say, all right, credit where credit is due, right? I personally think there's no such thing as a perfect tier list. Every single tier list out there, it's impossible to satisfy what your personal agendas are going to be. Because you might know more, you might know less than the other person, right? And then you have disagreements. So, as much as at the end of the day, a tier list is just a tier list and it's like for fun, I think Prywin is like the only EN website that like consistently pump out all these kind of things. I'm not sponsored by Prywin, but and they didn't pay me money to say this, but like they are like one of the only consistent EN website that like I personally would trust for all the data. Right? Okay, maybe not so much the tier list, but I will use that site for like the MOC clears, the statistics, right? Because no one else is doing it, right? So W Prywin personally. So and then what I do, anybody, right? See you guys on the clip. Bye bye. Okay, we're done. Yep, Andrew gave me 500. You have cooled your last cool, my man.